All righty. All right. We are live. Test 1, 2, 3. Good to see everybody out there again for another wonderful episode of This Week in Drones, streaming to you live here every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Deep diving conversations around the drone industry, drones for good, and then also, the drone threat and what we're allowed to do about it and what's coming out, in legislation and such. And so recently some of us got to go to the Energy, Drone, and Robotics Conference and had a great time over there meeting with electric utilities. And, a lot of them were showing us what they're doing with drones for inspections and using them for really cool applications. And then some were there on the security side where they were actually like learning and really concerned about drones and what that threat looks like. So we had, a couple of those conversations spark, and maybe want to invite a good friend, Travis Moran with SERC, who is part of the, is a regulator for the electric industry covering the Southeast region. So he knows, a lot about this world, what's new, what's coming, and what the reality is there. So I wanted to kind of level check some of the things that we heard at that conference with him, being on the call with us today. And then of course, Michelle Duquette with 3 Mad Air, aviation expert, decades in the industry. She just brings a ton of knowledge about how the airspace works as we try to play around with drones and do our thing with them in the airspace. She helps us to go, okay, how does that fit into like the actual, framework? And how do we do a good job integrating them? So with that said, I guess, do you guys, maybe Travis, Michelle, I'll give it to you each and in that order, just to say a few words if you want to do like a quick introduction, let people know, kind of context for what you do. That'd be helpful. And then I'll kick off the first question. Yeah, Travis, you want to just share a little bit about your background?
Sure. It's not mine. I wish that was my background. No. I came 24 years in federal law enforcement. After I retired, I went to work for one of the biggest utilities, Dominion Energy, to protect critical assets that they had, and knew nothing about energy at the time. Learned a ton. They were wonderful. Spent some time at NERC, and now I'm at SERC. NERC and SERC are part of the regulatory framework that's promulgated from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I know it's a lot of acronyms, but it passes that authority down to the regions, which we are one of. We have 16 states in the Southeast, South Central that we regulate the utility industries, but we don't like to. We prefer we'd rather do education training and all those things to keep people out of the principal's office per se, versus being the principal's office. So we really look at it at that holistic approach. Drones, we first started talking about them in 2015. Michelle and I were having a discussion, obviously before this, about this evolution or lack thereof of drones and security since that time, and we can talk about that later, but that's just a little bit and enough about me.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Michelle Duquette, 3 Mad Air, and I'm very interested in this conversation. I'm hearing kind of characterizations of drones in energy that in some cases are in direct opposition of one another. So I'm really interested in hearing kind of what your world looks like from your perspective, Travis, and maybe we can poke a little bit at some of those things that I've been hearing out there in the wild.
Absolutely. And I'll just shout out to some of the comments already. We got Richard out there. Greetings from Belter Drone Brigade. And then, of course, Kevin Fitzgerald. Hello from TXM Energy. Looks like you guys might know each other. I'm going to see if Kevin would like to call in and maybe chat with us for a minute. But if anyone else is out there currently, while we're live, please send in questions, send in your thoughts, ask a question for Travis, Michelle, myself, and we can banter about it here while you got us all on the hook. And so, yeah. And Kevin, if you have any other thoughts you want to type in as we're live, but with that, Travis, I think the first overall thought I had coming back from that conference recently and kind of learning the industry was just, I'm curious how drones are perceived right now amongst electric utilities and the leadership within those utilities. Is it, are they widely being embraced as a tool for good, for inspections, for the other things I have been seeing, or are they more widely being, seen as a threat, as a risk? And I don't know, what have you seen in that trend over the last, year or whatever it's been since I've known you, year or two, I think that I've known you and came to your course and everything, which was awesome.
So there are two pieces to what you're asking. There's the operational piece and there's the security piece. From the operational piece in energy, everything is seen through the prism of cost, right? Can drones reduce cost of doing certain activities? And also, can they increase safety? Because safety at electric utilities and gas and also the others, oil, is paramount because they don't want OSHA, right? They don't want that problem. They safety is huge. So any task that you can automate in that way is something that they look very favorably upon. And that's on the operational side. So inspections, being able to fly the lines, automation, hopefully more so. We've got some DDoS authorizations that have happened with some of the utilities. So that's good stuff. So that's the operational side. They're looked on very positively, and especially as prices have come down on them and reliability has gone up. Still have the supply chain issues with regard to the Defense Authorization Act and those kinds of things, but air gapping and stuff will apply. On the security side of the house, it's more complex. Security, again, is not a revenue generating entity within the enterprise. So it's very disparate. Some utilities, depending upon how the executive team and security team look at them, as huge threats. Others see them as okay, so what? We have all these other problems and issues, and we recover from hurricanes, which we deal with in my region a lot, and we recover within days. So that it just depends, right? There's no unified opinion on them. We have, as an industry, recognized them as a threat and included that, what you saw in our course, in what's called our design basis threat. So that if you're getting audited, they're going to ask you, what do you do about drones at this point in time? And it could be as simple as saying, I have an awareness and a reporting campaign. It could be as complex as saying, well, I'm going to buy detection technology. And it's all in between. So it is really a very disparate view on the security side.
Interesting. That's good. I wanted to get into the price and quality question on the drones with NDAA. I don't know how spicy we want to get on that one, but I'm kind of curious what the electric utility industry has, how they've perceived that NDAA, DJI ban or whatever it may look like for them. Everyone sees it different. Law enforcement, everyone gets impacted differently by not being able to utilize DJI drones. We have people on the show who have both, who see both sides of that, who say there's serious risks that people just aren't aware of. It's true. And other people just say you can firewall and that's just a political thing. I don't know. Just how is it perceived? Whatever you want to speak to on that.
Cyber side is perceived exactly as that. The supply chain issue about the chips in the actual units is something that's playing out on a national level on all of our infrastructure, right down to camera systems on the security side of the house, because they're IoT devices. On the drones, it's more complicated in that there's an array board on the actual device itself, and then you have to do the air gapping. We would always advise them, if you have a USB stuck to that thing or an SDK, do not put the SD card. Don't put that into anything that's system connected. Just don't do it. I don't care what you're doing. Don't do it. If you want to have pictures and everything up and put it in a standalone, non-networked computer that is not where the printer is not linked, do it that way to try to ameliorate those problems that you might have on the cyber concern. So I know there's companies that use them. I mean, they're cost effective. They work. And there's others that completely stay away from them because I can't really speak to this in terms of getting into details, but there have been incidents of exfiltration. But where are we not penetrated, I guess, is a better thing at this. It's good cyber hygiene, really, to be quite honest. I don't want to belabor this topic too much on that.
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious the initial take, Michelle. Thoughts?
So I think how you just characterized this, Travis, is something that anyone in any other sector could also say. We know that there is a concern, whether it's across drones or solar panels or the electronics within medical devices, within our cell phones, within televisions, whatever it is. We recognize that. But the utility company, the energy sector specifically, your vulnerabilities are really high up there on the list of things that we all should be concerned about. So what I'm curious about is, in your community, are you registering as a collective that you are in fact one of the national assets that is an extreme vulnerability that has an influence on a lot of other things being able to function if you allow your vulnerability to be exploited? And we are about This Week in Drones, so I'm going to focus on drones. I know that's not the only vulnerability, but for this conversation, can we talk a little bit about the nuances in your world, and perhaps the varying of opinions and therefore policies that you find across the nation or in your region of responsibility that are giving you those differing positions, and how you're getting after that?
Sure. I will do my best to answer this in the most elegant and non-elongated way. There are three tiers to the system. There's the national tier, which contains the most sensitive substations that we have in facilities. They fall under the suite of SIP standards, and some of the lower facilities do as too. But for the physical security side, only a very small percentage do. And that's by design, because they're so critical to the health of instability in the grid, cascading events. So these critical infrastructure protection standards, is a suite of them, and they're mostly cybersecurity, but there are two that pertain to physical: SIP 6 and SIP 14. SIP 14 is whereby the DBT process exists, where you will be asked as a utility, if you have a facility that applies, applicable to, that's a key variable, whether or not you have considered drones as a threat, vulnerability, and then what you've done against them or to protect against them from the physical side. On the cyber side, you get into the supply chain issue, you get into the firewalls, you get into, there's so many, there's 710, there's so many of the SIP standards that apply to this that they have to be very, very careful with. So the industry takes all of this extremely seriously. We're one of the most regulated industries out there. Matter of fact, most of them don't have the standards we do. But even given that, the vulnerabilities that exist are myriad because of the different levels of the system. So even if you're just a very small, if you're a co-op, for example, your local cooperative, which we have where I live, those are entry points into the system. And having those firewalls, having those cybersecurity pieces. So even if they're using a drone to do something, you want to have an IDS, intrusion detection system, that's not physical but is cyber, to be able to detect those anomalies if something's happening. And these are all things we talk about, and at different levels they're required to do. So we understand, probably very poignantly compared to others, that the whole thing doesn't run without electricity, and that we're talking about life, safety, and health, and these life-sustaining activities. So they're extremely aware of it. The big investor owns have their own intelligence gathering groups to try to deal with these issues, and they're trying to, even the supply chain point of where are we purchasing stuff from? Can the company certify that the chips are sourced in this particular area? Are the patch updates? Are the updates available? Do we cleanse them first before we put them even into the system? So, the best I can, quick, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but that's how we look at it for sure.
Well,
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And if you would be so kind, when you have a moment, to provide a link to the SIPs, because I think that there are several folks in our audience who would appreciate being able to read through what you're talking about, whether or not they're in the energy sector, so that they can see how another sector is protecting themselves from these types of vulnerabilities using their drones.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we tell them when we teach the course, David went through it. It doesn't matter what level you are in the system. You can take the SIP standards and look at them and apply them to yourself to raise your baseline of security, both cyber and physical. So that's a great point. And I'll try to manipulate this to do it and not screw anything up.
Or if you want to send it to either David or I, we can post it later.
Yeah, perfect. And actually, that does segue into the second talking point, which you referenced briefly there, Travis, which is NERC-CIP. Regarding drones, I know that in the SERC training and that I went to in Florida, it was referenced, as you mentioned, as like, hey, what are you doing about drones to each utility? Now, how does it work? I guess like are drones referenced as a threat in the official NERC-CIP documentation? Out of curiosity, and then a second, slightly not related question, I guess, is like, how does the DBT process really does it work for drones? Because doesn't that require pretty significant historical evidence of a threat for it, for the math to like weigh a threat to justify a certain dollar investment, et cetera? And if there hasn't been a long list of historical drone attacks on critical infrastructure in the U.S., for example, then it could be, I think it can be challenging with a DBT model for it to carry much weight or to get funding towards it. But I'm kind of just curious. I guess that was sort of a two-part question: just drones in the NERC-CIP requirement, or how that's kind of couched in there, and then secondly, that DBT regarding drones. You're on mute, by the way.
So. Stop saying so before I start my sentences. For the process, again, it has to be a facility that it applies to for SIP 14. But you can use SIP 14 as a guideline, as a baseline for any facility that you may have in our sector and other sectors as well, to be quite honest. But the process is that you first have to understand what the threat is. Right, you have to define that threat, and that's what the design basis threat is, and that comes out of the DoD space and the nuclear space. And it's a really, really good tool to use. The electric sector has one in general that you can get through the Electric Sector Information Sharing Analysis Center if you're a utility. And it gives you a baseline for what this is. And so it's the techniques, tactics, and capabilities of your adversaries. So if you put it in there as a tactic and a capability of your adversary, you have to have then a way to deal with it. It is not congruent at this particular time to say you don't perceive them as a problem. You at least have to identify that, okay, drones are a threat that are permeating all of our industries right now, because we know this. We haven't had, to your other point, a specific incident that I can point to whereby we've been able to definitively shown that they've used a drone to attack our infrastructure. Now, we have an incident whereby an inference is drawn, but again, you get to the difficulty of you got to have the operator, right, to understand intent. It goes back to my old law enforcement days, and this is where that disconnect happens and continues to be very difficult for us as an industry. Is that even with the sound detection, the operator is often still hard to find, and you still have to interview them. And what are they doing? They're flying legally in the national airspace. So that's a problem. So okay, you go encounter them. What are you doing here? I'm flying my drone. Well, they could have the most awful intent possible, but if you can't see something on that drone that gives you that inference that this is a true threat, you're relying on that person to give you that information, or preoperative intelligence. So the DBT process and the SIP 14 process are steps whereby then you gather all this information to try to come up with the best credible and referenceable information to enhance and understand what your threat posture is going to be. So it can be problematic from that standpoint. Hey, Brandon.
Hi, Travis. Sorry, everybody.
All
I'm not
good.
important. I get it.
Well, I thought I pulled them up right through your thoughts. Sorry, I interrupted your flow of thought there, Travis, but I thought Brandon would probably have some thoughts on where you're going with that. But you were saying it's helpful if you can find the pilot. When you do talk to the pilot, they tend to be able to show that they were not doing anything illegal, is what we're saying, because currently today there aren't official flight restrictions by default over a substation or generation plant in a given area, as far as I know. Maybe there's unique cases, but by default they don't. And we could go into 2209 next. Actually, that is where I wanted to go. Not quite yet, but here in a minute, or unless this just flows right into it, we need to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, it kind of does flow into that. But so the fact that there aren't official flight restrictions means anybody could legally take their drone, and as long as they're flying, not over people, and they have their lights on at night, and they're flying under 400 feet, and etc., and they're following those rules, and they have their Part 107 lights, whatever, or their trust light, as long as they can kind of show that they weren't doing anything.
Times a day.
Okay.
Travis, do you find that these infractions, well, they're not necessarily infractions legally, I guess, if they are flying legally.
Exactly.
But these concerns are happening at substations that are within close proximity to an airport?
What's that, Travis?
They're in rural areas. I mean, look, our stuff is lit up. It's shiny. People like to shoot at it. They like to fly around it. They like to fly between the lines. They like to test the boundaries. It's just people are people. They do it.
What I'm getting at, though, I think, is that while the 2209 discussion that we're about to have is one level of solution, we do have other controls in place, like the UAS facility maps at each of the facilities for those airports, that could also be probably fine-tuned a little bit better.
So that's an interesting conversation, and we had that with DHS actually a couple of years ago, because they wanted to leverage Lance grids or USAFM grids for that purpose. However, the issue we got into on the air traffic side was Lance grids were never built for that purpose. It was built very specifically for air traffic flow into an airport. And from a policy perspective, we're very reluctant to expand the purpose of a USAFM grid for security reasons. So just two other things I just want to kick out real quick. One's a quick story again about DHS. There's a massive plant, fertilizer plant in Louisiana. It's one of the largest in the world. And they had drone overflights. And where you have fertilizer, you have ammonium nitrate, and you have potentially explosives as well. So the drone was flying over the site, and they said, well, this is a problem. And I said, it may be a perception of a problem, but there's no legal problem here, because there's nothing preventing that drone from flying over. It's Class G airspace. So as long as they're maintaining 400 feet below, they have a, like Travis was saying, the hobbyist license or certificate or whatever, Part 107, they're legal. And so there's nothing you can do. And there's a comment down there in Ohio. It says in Ohio that we passed laws this year that making flying over infrastructure illegal. That's what's called preemption of federal law. You technically can't do that. And so if a person was arrested under that state law for flying over that infrastructure, what they would do is appeal that to federal court, and then it would get thrown out in federal court, because states can't preempt federal law. And so this is happening all over the place. It's actually a really good case where marijuana laws, you can legalize recreational marijuana, but that doesn't stop the DEA from coming in and pressing federal charges against you. It just means the state won't. So that I'm a little, some of these state laws that are coming out are a little bit dangerous, because it gives you a false sense of legal security when the Louisiana is another one. Actually, here in Virginia, they just passed one that went effective July 1, that it would be a federal preemption issue as well. So be careful with some of the state laws that they're passing. Really understand that airspace control is a federal function, a federal authority, and states cannot regulate that at all. They can regulate where you launch and land a drone from, because that's land, but they cannot regulate the airspace.
to your point, Brandon, I want to make sure everybody hears this. I would not want, as in my former days, I would not want to bet my career on a state law protecting me if I took some action that preempted federal law. So let's say I did a mitigation. If I could clearly articulate that I saw a shuttlecock with a 20-millimeter grenade flying over people, and I took some action, I might be okay. But that's a very, very narrow articulation of intent, and that's the problem.
And
wait, Brandon.
go ahead.
I want to also show the audience why this podcast is so much fun, because now I'm going to disagree with you right on in front of everybody in the whole world.
I love it. Let's do it.
And it's nice seeing everybody. We'll see you next week. Closing down the line. I
want to go back to the UAS facility maps. And for everybody out there that's not familiar with our language, Brandon referred to it as UAS.
You sap them. There you go. I don't know. Am I wrong? I don't know. Whatever.
I don't know. Sure.
Okay, I'm wrong.
So the UAS facility maps, how you characterized it as being completely designed around the flow of traffic in and out of those airports, 100% agree. However, with 2209 pending and the FAA taking on a responsibility to contribute to the protection of critical infrastructure, I think we've got a foot in the door. So I'm not so willing actually to discount that with these other tools that we have that are controls for how we manage drone flight, that they couldn't also be part of a solution as long as it's done deliberately and in collaboration with the principal offices.
So I don't disagree with you. This is a nuance that we could discuss for a long time. The ones, because we ran in this with the 99.7s, because there were some government national security facilities that were underneath controlled airspace, and they said, we want the Lance grid to 0. I said, well, you already have a 99.7. It's an airspace restriction. You can't go in it. But so, and this is what came up, Michelle. I'd love for your feedback on this is, let's say you went through the SOSC, you got an SGI in order to access that 99.7, but now you still have a Lance COA issue that's 0, but not for a safety issue, for a security issue. But how is that COA going to be evaluated? Because you have to submit another approval request through the service center to get access to that. But there's actually no safety reason to zeroize that grid. So what are they really evaluating at that point?
So this is why ASH and ATO need to work this out. And they are with 2209. I know, right? With 2209, though, they are working together on joint automation to help them fuse the security and the safety mitigation approaches that they want to put into this software. So I would just posture that it's now a great opportunity for industry, for you, Travis, for the folks who are in your world, to be letting the FAA know that, look, we've got these kinds of concerns. And even though you are working on Counter-UAS authorities for SLTT in addition to the federal authorities that also have them, we have this circumstance here where we have our own security and we don't have a really meaningful way to distinguish good from nefarious. And we need some help with that.
Right.
2209 is going to be one measure of, but it's not going to get you where you need to be.
It's not going to give infrastructure mitigation.
Correct.
It will give us the ability to prosecute, which is huge, if you get a UAFR, unmanned aircraft flight restriction, designated. But you're going to have to show evidence for this. And this is where I'm sure our host is going to smile greatly, because you're going to have to provide evidence. And we tell them this. You're just not going to get a UAFR because you apply for it. You're really going to have to articulate why, and you're going to have evidence. And that evidence is going to have to show that, let's say, a certain amount of flights, a certain amount of time that are giving you pause around a certain critical asset. So there's that piece for us, which would be good for the prosecutorial level. Travis,
can I just insert this one thought on what you just said? Because I think it's important talked to a really massive electric utility recently at a summit, and they said one of their biggest training, the biggest focuses in training their employees is to report on drone activity, whether they think it's a big deal or not, and so that they can start to gather that sort of evidence along the way. And it's pretty tough to train, thousands of employees all across the US and globally and within this organization, but they do a lot of work, and I don't want to, I want to let you finish your thought, but I just wanted to insert the fact that people are talking about that regularly. Like, how do we have a good reporting system so that we can show evidence? If there is evidence at a given site, we have it, and we have it detailed and documented. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
So there's a group for the Electricity Information Sharing Analysis Center that is doing just that. We're coming up with a framework for reporting that'll be a national framework that we can give them so that they can have, what to ask, what to know, and then that process for, hopefully for when 2209 comes about. But I always want to caveat that you have to remember, for every action, there's a reaction, and you got to be prepared for this. So mitigation is, you are seizing property. You are going into constitutional areas when you do this. So sworn personnel, absolutely. For us, there's the bigger hurdle of, we are private enterprise. We are not sworn personnel. And I always try to tell them, look, private enterprise getting constitutional authority outside of the nuclear regulatory, the nuclear controlled zones, that's a whole nother animal.
And this is an interesting point, because I just met this week with AFPM, the American Fuels and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, API, American Petroleum Institute, ACD, ACC, and specifically talking about drones and drone threats. And so there's two things, and I'll hit on Travis's part first. I completely just lost train of thought because I'm stuck on this reporting thing.
No, well, Brandon, I think what you had shared with them was regarding mitigation or like self-defense.
That's right.
Okay.
So thank you. So as we all know, there's a lot of proposed legislation out there to expand counter-UAS drone detection and mitigation authority to SLTT law enforcement. There is not a single piece of proposed legislation to expand that to private security, Securitas, Allied Universal, and some of these other larger security companies that are contracted by folks like Chevron, BP, and all these others to provide that additional security. So even if, again, going back to Travis's point, you have an airspace restriction, it doesn't mean that those that actually protect you have that authority to do anything about a drone that violates that airspace restriction anyways. So there's a caveat. And then real quick, Michelle, sorry, I just want to hit on the reporting thing before I completely lose my mind again. That's the very other thing that we talked about was reporting. So the FAA is a data-driven organization. If you do not come to them with the data to back up the reason for the justification, you're going to have an issue, because just saying I have a problem, just saying I am vulnerable, that's not enough. And I know Michelle knows way more about that than I do. And so, Michelle, please.
Sure. That was where my head was going. So very nicely done. I wonder if it scares you that you're that far inside my head now.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's why we're going to talk tomorrow, right?
So where I was going to go is that this sector is one of many sectors, and you brought up like private security. I was approached by, he's basically a very highly paid bodyguard for VIP assets that come into the United States. And his ask to me was for help, because he couldn't seem to find anyone who understood his situation that could be in a position to actually facilitate that conversation, and they're in dire need. So there are multiple sectors that are out there that are in need of clarification and another path to help with the security mitigation. Because what we don't want is we don't want to be in a position where we've got to wait for something to happen before there is a recognition that the policy needs to evolve. So to your point, Brandon, being able to identify a risk ratio perhaps that allows the FAA to do a crosswalk between the risk of having a safety policy in place against the risk of security implications to the safety of those operations, that absolutely has to happen, number one. Number two is on the national security side, someone needs to do a risk ratio there to understand the risk impacts from these various sectors. And, you know, we're all about employing extended policy for SLTT authorities for mitigation, but I do not want anybody to take out the grid in the Northeast just as much. I think that is vitally important. And we don't have enough cops to be able to man those things 24/7. So as Travis was saying, they have their own security programs and staff and resources and assets that should be leveraged. I don't know how yet, but that conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen before someone takes the grid out.
Yeah, 100%. Travis, I'm curious to also. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm also curious to see if you've had any solid interactions with like CISA and to see how they possibly supporting the critical infrastructure environment to help with some of these flight restrictions or airspace restrictions they may get in the future.
Yes, yes, I know them quite well. You know, I'm not going to mention their names, but there are a couple of them. Been known for quite some time. We've done a lot of talking back and forth about these problems over the years, and they're trying their best. It's very bureaucratic and technical for a host of reasons, which you understand. So I want to. There's so many points to this. We could go on for hours, but you know, and you know, don't get me started on RID, for example. But Kevin Fitzgerald brought up a point about you know, they don't want a lot of the utilities don't want their stuff listed on because it's like a target list, right? So they feel that it could be potentially a target list if you put these UFLRs on a map, because they're going to be on the NOTAM maps. The FAA told us, well, you know, we already put all the critical infrastructure on the maps anyway, right? You know, you can't. There's certain other nuclear facilities, the few that are listed, that can't be flown over in the military. So, you know, their position is it's already out there anyway, both in the NOTAMs and also in the you know, just geospatial technology that's out there. So there is an argument. The utilities are very sensitive about this. Some are, some aren't. Again, it's a very disparate. Remember, you're talking about at the largest level, investor-owned, shareholder-driven organization. So it gets incongruent quick.
Yeah, and
Well,
actually, one of them. Sorry, Brandon, but just one of them said recently that his argument was for not putting flight restrictions over thousands of or hundreds of his sites, you know, critical sites, because to your point, a target list, Travis, is he said he thinks that like the FBI and others would actually be able to utilize or look for anomalous behavior of people trying to put that list together as part of their evidence to try to, you know, get in front of it. Whereas if they put the map together and just send it out, it's just freely available as a snapshot on the internet. They might lose some of that underlying, you know, traceable search. I don't know. That was one of his points he threw out when I was chatting with him, but it was like a massive global, you know, investor-owned utility that said that, you know.
All good points.
But,
all good points.
I
There's
think
no easy answer. That's why we have this podcast.
oh yeah, Brandon, I guess you were next. I interrupted Brandon already. Go ahead, Brandon.
No, it's okay. I mean, here's the risk versus reward calculation that every organization is going to have to make. If you want a 2209 to restrict the airspace, you have to tell the public it's there, because if you don't, you're not restricting the airspace, right? How am I as a drone operator supposed to know that I'm not supposed to be there if you don't tell me that I'm not supposed to be there? And so that's the whole point, that you have to display this. And I want to show you real quick, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to share.
Let me take off. I'm going to remove. Yep, there you go.
Oh shit! And I got to remember how to do this.
Okay, you think, and
yeah, you do that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to kind of dial this conversation back just a little bit, because It's not going to be the in today's age where satellite imagery is so readily available, the maps aren't the issue. That, in my mind, is a distraction. The people who want to be who want to execute nefarious acts, they have access. They don't need our maps. Okay, it doesn't matter what we put out there. They don't need that. They know what they're doing. They know how to get that data. So I'm not really convinced that putting out a map at this point is going to be all that impactful, or not putting out a map is it's not going to be all that impactful.
Right. I agree. I mean, the amount of data that's available out there on various different locations of facilities, it's all known. It's there, right? So this is the FAA UDDS website. I'm very, very familiar with it as we work with it. So my office used to actually coordinate all of these big red areas that you see here. These are 14 CFR 99.7 SSIs. They're national security flight restrictions. So you can pull any of these up and see it's DOD. This is Fort Carson, 400 feet AGL. Here's the contact information if you want to get access or ask for access into that space. So this already exists. There was discussion on how we were going to display it, whether they leverage this platform or another one. You can also see the Lance grids on here. All of these little blue dots are FRIAs where you can fly without. Yes, sir.
Go to the left coast, right, where there's the purple lines, lavender lines, because that's what it's going to be, right? The UAFR is going to be under the purple line.
No. So the purple line is for the Navy and now the Coast Guard. So what this specific NOTAM said is that any naval vessel out there has a 3,000-foot lateral and a 1,000-foot vertical moving 99.7 over top of it. So if you encroach in on a naval vessel within the sovereign boundaries of U.S. territorial water, that is essentially violating national security flight. So this was the only way we were able to do this. We struggled with that one quite a lot, but it's the only way that we could display that. So what the 2209 would look like would probably be a different color than the 99.7 to distinguish the two. Yes.
Go up to that. There's that one railway up in New Jersey, and they have. I think you can show it there if you can get to New Jersey and draw down on New Jersey. My
wife's from New Jersey. I'm unfortunately very familiar with the state. Sorry if there's anybody that are from Jersey on here. I'm not. Anyways.
Brian, I try to keep you out of trouble, and
go down. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I know, Michelle, you know me. So again, what happens here is this is typically, I got to be careful here. So there's a reason why I'll say that is blocked off, and it's a very good reason. Again, this was a struggle because the FAA typically tries to only restrict airspace over sensitive ground assets that are owned and operated or leased by the entity that they are restricting that airspace from. And so this is kind of like a really weird situation. You don't see these very often. My guess on the 2209 front is you will not see this, because I think it's going to be so limiting. There's no way a 2209 would cover long line linear infrastructure type infrastructure. I just don't think that's plausible.
Interesting.
So and I'm sorry, real fast, and I'll stop. FAA UDDS UAS data delivery system. Just Google it. You can pull that up. There's a lot of airspace Lance providers that pull data straight from there because there's an export feature through CSV files, and that's where you can get a lot of really cool stuff that you can do whatever with.
Pretty cool. If you can find the link to that, we can maybe post it to the live. That'd be cool, or as a comment, just so people could find it. That'd be helpful. Or we could do it after the fact. Travis, you said don't get you started on remote ID. Why not? I mean, I'm curious on that, because actually, well, I'll give context, because in order to prove that you need a flight restriction, you might want a sensor, whether it be remote ID or, of course, I'm biased towards radars, but, you need at least something to give you data to show that there are flights happening. But so why not remote ID? Or
be blunt, Travis. We're all thinking the same thing. It's all good. We got your back.
So
just be kind, okay? I don't care what you say.
Maybe not. So I have been trying to, and Ron Leach knows this, who's been on your program for years, raise this issue. What you're talking about being a system that is valuable to the officer on the ground. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people on the ground now, right? We're talking about responding law enforcement to incidents, and particularly like a multiple drone incident, because that's where we're headed. To do that, you're going to have to be able to deconflict criminal history information instantaneously, right? Because limited resources, I got to direct my officer where the real threat is. And if I've got 5, 6, whatever up in the air, and they all have different operators, I've got to be able to distill that information quickly to direct my limited resources. Okay, well, to be able to do that, you have to interface with NLITS. And NLITS is the National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, which all of us used to use when we get a car driver's a license plate. We run it through NLITS, blah, blah, blah. We get the operator information, 1027, 1026, to find out wants, warrants, all that kind of stuff, protective orders, blah, 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 blah. Well, that interface then has to go from NLITS through the FAA to the Criminal Justice Information System run by the FBI. The understanding of just the complexities of that, number one, that data and managing it, the audit complexities that the NLITS and the FBI put on handling that data, the seamlessness, which the officer is going to have to be able to get it back quickly, is the part that is just not been unpacked or understood. So in concept, RID is, conceptualized as a really cool thing. Operationally, there are so many challenges there, and that's just my perspective, and you guys probably have a different one.
So the challenge is the shared database, right? Because like an individual remote ID sensor company could have their own database to show, hey, this remote ID popped up over here, and then it popped up over there. Same. Why did it pop? Why is it coming once a week? The same remote ID every time to your nuclear plant flying over for an hour. Maybe you should report this, right? Like that could happen within one ecosystem, but then you're talking about a national database that actually rolls it out, that you could actually operate with law enforcement and other things like that, right? I mean, is that fair?
Officer on the ground. Remember, okay. It's for two things: operational efficiency and expediency, and especially in exigent circumstances, and officer safety, number 2. Without those two.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are some companies actually that are out there that are building those databases on their own because they do see that as from a lucrative business model, putting all that into a singular cloud based on their detection systems. But it is stovepiped, right? It's not mandated, spread across, so that you will find gaps in tech. My one issue with remote ID, and we highlighted it through the rulemaking process, was the lack of power output on the actual broadcast module itself. You can fly 20 feet away from it and lose remote ID just simply because there's not enough power output on the signal. And there's a lot of interference out there. And so that can disrupt that signal to the detector. And I always had trouble with that technical requirement of that. And it needs to be 400 feet minimum from that drone, because here's one of the big problems is that let's say a drone is flying and you're not getting a remote ID alert from that drone on whatever system you're using. You could and then infer that is not remote ID equipped, which could imply criminal intent. And that's a problem because that drone could be 100% compliant with all the regulations. It just doesn't have enough power output to get to that signal.
Okay. Real quick. I mean, tons of comments on here. I've not been able to even keep up with it, but this one, Ed Knock, posted in here. Are we concerned about compliant drones or more so the bad actors? Because that's one question, remote ID versus picking them up, or not remote ID. And then the backup to that, or the second point was, okay, well, wait, or compliant versus non-compliant. Good first step when you say passive versus active tracking. I'm kind of filling in the blanks, but obviously, like when I'm part of a sensor stack, sorry, Travis, I don't know if you were chatting there. You were breaking up maybe for a second, but I just want to see what you guys' thoughts were on that.
Okay, it's a great question. So you have 6 in the sky. let's say 5 of them are compliant, good actors, but one of them's not. One of them has, and let's say it's a sexual harassment call where there's protective order against one of the actors, but you're not going to know that unless you run them all. Well, if you run them all, then you get into that Fourth Amendment problem. So these are it's complicated questions, because then you're talking about an unnecessary unwanted search of a person's information. They're in the navigable airspace, but we're really getting down into, when you're getting into, actually searching when they're not the target or the subject, or even under reasonable suspicion, it gets messy quick.
So I think that is one of those gray areas that we have been applying a broad brush to, and it's just not working in the drone world, right? It's not like a license plate on your car where, any law enforcement can scan it and see what it is and see where you are and what your name is and all of that stuff. We want that same kind of capability for local law enforcement. And there's not really a need for you as a security agent at a substation to be able to read somebody's license plate on their car. However, we may have a need for you to be able to have some intelligence on unidentified drones that are flying over your facility. So I think, and I'm also hearing something else from you too with regard to remote ID, that it's not necessarily the remote ID function that isn't helping, although Brandon, your point of low power is well taken. And there are several remote ID service suppliers who feel the exact same way. But it's that once that query goes out and it goes through all of the checkpoints that it's got to go throughout to check all of the different databases that it needs to check in order to find whatever it is that gives you that nefarious lead, coming back to that officer on the ground is the problem. So there does need to be another layer of translation that needs to happen after all of that query and processing and fusing that comes back to that officer in a timely manner and in a meaningful, actionable way. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That's interesting. And then Ed also kind of
100%.
Ed kind of threw in this caveat too, like, wouldn't you as a security person want to focus on the one that you can't identify? So like not necessarily run all 6 in your story, but just say one of them's not compliant.
What if they're all compliant operationally, but the operator is flying it? And what if they're all compliant, but the operator has protective order that just got issued, right? This is the myriad, or threat to law enforcement officer, right? We would encounter people all the time on a stop where it's like, there'd be an annotation in the CAD system about assaults on law enforcement is proceed with caution. Okay, that's what we're talking about.
And so just real quick, so 2 points real fast. Never underestimate sometimes the stupidity of people. and what I'm saying is that they could be potentially completely compliant with all FAA regulations and still be doing something bad. So I have, you see funny videos on YouTube of the world's dumbest criminals, and they're like doing a holdup in a convenience store wearing their maintenance shirt with their name on it. I mean, like, don't. So just because the drone's pushing remote ID and maybe potentially compliant does not necessarily mean that they're not doing something bad, stalking and etc. And then Michelle, I'm so sorry. I just want to hit on one more thing super fast on a different perspective of, are we targeting compliant versus non-compliant? And we ran into this with the DoD all the time, is removing the chaff or the density of air traffic to identify the bad people easier and faster. So there's really no purpose for anybody to be flying 400 feet below over a nuclear power plant or an oil refinery. I'm sorry that, yes, this is America, but there's just really no practical reason why that needs to happen, especially given the risk if those operations were disrupted to the day-to-day civilian operation. So compliant operators will comply with that airspace restriction, which helps identify the bad actors or those who want to create harm, because they're going to violate that to try and do some harm. And so you can react faster. And that's a really important piece to distinguish between friendly and foe.
So like flight restrictions, basically flight restrictions with 2209 over critical infrastructure would at least help to say the compliant folks are going to fly around those locations because of the flight restriction, and then people are going to ignore it and just fly right through it. Those are the 100%. People that, to Ed's question, I got to, before we end the live, and then Michelle, I just want to highlight this, guys. A lot of us are going to be next week in DC at the Drone and AM Symposium. Would love to meet you there in person. We'll be doing some filming. We'll be having some fun and continuing these conversations. If you haven't bought your ticket yet, then we got a special one here for the viewers of This Week in Drones, DAPS 25 TWID, that little TWID, This Week in Drones, just for us, $50 off registration. So jot that down. Michelle's gonna be there, Brandon's gonna be there, Travis, feel free to come unless you're already planning on it. We're gonna have a lot of fun, and we're talking about policy. That's what the point of this is: Drone and AM Policy Symposium put on by AUVSI. So I just want to make sure y'all saw that, and we got a little shout out for that one. So Michelle, take it away, and we got about 3 minutes left.
Really, all I wanted to do was kind of boil all of this down to recognition that there is no all or nothing, one size fits all solution here. We talk about the layers of counter-UAS and drone mitigation for a reason. What everybody has been talking about on this particular podcast have been validating the need for various layers. We have situational awareness. Now we have some triggers, and we're going to have some prioritization of those triggers. And we're going to have some actions that are associated with those prioritized triggers. That's all good. So please don't let yourself fall into the trap of all or nothing. If we're talking about a solution that's not necessarily your passion, it doesn't mean it's not a layer. But bring your voice to the table, and let's talk about your layer also. That's all I wanted to point out.
And I just want to put one positive on all of this is that 2209s help integration because it lowers the temperature of the fear, because these drones are just flying over a lot of critical infrastructure sites today, and they don't know if they're good or bad. Well, if you put in that airspace restriction so that the compliant have to operate around that, it lowers down the overflights, and it creates a positive societal impact and perception of drone operations because they don't immediately automatically think, they're all bad. So having security protection measures in place helps the overall integration effort and get to that full commercialization of the drones. And everything Michelle said, I obviously always agree with. So Travis, I think you should.
Travis, take us home.
Last thing, 2209 is a concept. It's going to be a NOPR, Notice of Proposed Rules Making. That means you're going to have a chance to comment on it and try to make it better. So especially if you're an industry member, when it gets promulgated, read it. We tell them all the utilities off, read it, comment, so we can get the best piece of legislation ultimately we can.
We should almost do that live on the show, go through it. And But thank you so much. Thanks, Travis, for being our special guest today and bringing insights on the electric utility whole world out there with all the compliances and what you guys are doing. You're doing a great job. Thanks for all the training that you guys provide along with everything else you're doing. But I got to benefit from that. So I'd recommend anybody go, who has a stake in this, whether you're an electric utility or a vendor that wants to sponsor some of Travis's sessions so that utilities can come and learn about all the security measures that they should be putting in place, including drones or against, the potential threat of drones. So shout out to you guys. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brandon and Michelle. All the amazing interaction out there. Thank you, everybody, for all the comments and everything there. It's been fun. And we'll see you guys next Thursday. Same time, same place.
Awesome. Thank you.